Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Brittany Hobson. The federal government announced new measures to protect the endangered North Atlantic right whale. But an alliance of environmental and fishery groups, scientists, and Indigenous people in the Maritimes say those efforts don't go far enough. Justin Brake reports.
Scott Bryson, Treasure Arnold!
These groups held a press conference in March in their fight against fossil fuel development in the Gulf. They say the latest threat to waters and marine life are new regulations being considered by the Trudeau government.
We're very fearful that species like the right whale, which hang by a thread, may actually go extinct.
We are here today to emphatically demand that the federal government ensure that the petroleum boards never be allowed any decision-making powers in the environmental assessment process. Period.
The Liberals say they're considering creating a single agency responsible for leading major project assessments. And in the case of offshore oil development in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, some of the tasks would be delegated to the province's offshore petroleum boards. Those boards, critics say, would be in a conflict of interest since their mandate is to facilitate offshore oil development.
Que le bateau soit déplacé ailleurs.
On Tuesday, Federal Fisheries Minister Dominic LeBlanc was in Moncton to announce new regulations to reduce risks posed to right whales from transport vessels and fishing gear.
The rope that attaches the crab trap to the primary buoy will be vertical in the water.
Last summer, 12 right whales died in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The minister said the impacts of oil and gas development were not considered when coming up with the new regulations.
Nobody should think for a minute that we won't take all of the measures necessary to ensure that the oil and gas sector isn't sustainable, isn't environmentally responsible, and doesn't represent a threat to endangered species.
The coalition says that's not good enough.
I think we're in a sort of a crisis mode with the right whales, and we're just looking at the immediate threats. But we do need to look at a broader picture and not degrade their environment, which can prevent them from effectively mating or feeding or their prey.
Some Mi'kmaq leaders oppose oil development in the Gulf, but most have been silent on the matter. Grandmother and water protector Doreen Bernard says if the Gulf and other waters are to be protected, the Mi'kmaq must unite.
The water is the same in Gaspésie as it is in the Bay of Fundy, where our territory is.
With the instructions that he take it to the Prime Minister directly.
The group marched to a Liberal Party office where they delivered a letter for Justin Trudeau asking the Prime Minister not to give any decision-making authority to the petroleum boards. APTN requested comment from Environment Minister Catherine McKenna. Our request was forwarded to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. A spokesperson responded but did not address the coalition's concerns. Justin Brake, APTN National News, Halifax.
The Trudeau government has called an emergency meeting on child welfare for tomorrow in Ottawa. They are being harshly criticized for allowing the numbers of First Nation children in care to increase while fighting against issues like Jordan's principle in court. Cindy Blackstock is one of those critics. Dennis Ward interviewed her earlier.
Cindy, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. What are you expecting from the meetings this week?
Well, I'm not sure, actually. I'll be watching like many of your viewers, because I'm hoping that we're going to see the provincial and territorial commitment to implementing Jordan's principle. And I hope that we see the federal government absolutely committing to compliance on the tribunal's orders and for full commitment to the Spirit Bearer plan, so we can eliminate all the inequalities that First Nations children, youth, and families experience. But I've looked at the draft agenda, and I'm not sure how those things are going to be achieved, given the agenda, the way it's structured.
You've also expressed some concerns that premiers and ministers won't be on hand for the meeting. Why is that something to worry about?
Because when we think about the reasons that First Nations kids go into care, it's poverty, poor housing, addictions related to the multi-generational trauma of residential schools. So that goes further than just the Child and Family Service Ministries. We really need the premiers to embrace something akin to the Spirit Bear Plan at a provincial and territorial level, working with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governments to make sure that those services respond to the kids' needs.
Minister Philpott has referred to the child welfare system as a humanitarian crisis. So are you expecting that there'll be some kind of federal government action that comes out this week?
Well, I certainly hope so. I've always measured the well-being of children as being our gauge versus announcements by any government. It really should be about whether on Saturday change has happened for kids that makes it more able for them to live the lives they wish to have.
The gathering will fall on the anniversary of the ruling by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. What are your thoughts on that, given that this meeting was announced months ago? It could have been held at any other time.
Well, I think in some ways it's proper that it's held on that day. It'll be 2 years since the tribunal handed down that decision that said that Canada was to immediately cease its discrimination. It hasn't done so. There's been 3 other non-compliance orders and another one pending. There's been some progress on Jordan's Principle, which is good, but more work needs to be done. And I think that having the meeting on this day really reminds all of us that we need to speak up. We need to make sure that those in power know that First Nations kids matter and they shouldn't have to wait any longer.
Cindy, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Dennis.
Living conditions for many Indigenous children in Canada is far from good. Indigenous Services Minister Jane Philpott herself has referred to the situation as a, quote, humanitarian crisis. Dennis Ward spoke with her on In Focus earlier today. Here is that interview.
Minister Philpott, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here in Ottawa today. What needs to be the outcome of this 2-day conference, in your opinion, to make this a success?
Well, this is a really important gathering, and we have to come out of this meeting with concrete steps and commitments. So I know as a federal government, we're coming to the meeting prepared to make firm, concrete commitments as to what we will do, what we believe some of our next steps are in terms of a complete reform of child welfare as it relates to Indigenous children. And I'm certainly hoping that other partners are coming to the table also prepared to acknowledge the solutions and commit to doing the work necessary to change the system.
Earlier today, the provincial and territorial ministers put out a joint release saying that, and calling on the federal government to provide new funding for all of this. Is that something that you're going to be committing to this week?
Absolutely. I, in fact, already announced at the Special Chiefs Assembly in December that we would be committing additional funding. It will come out in Budget 2018 in terms of what the exact number is, but we have acknowledged that there are still gaps that exist. Some of those gaps are the work that we need to do to fully implement the orders of the Human Rights Tribunal, and we're going to come to the meeting. I will reiterate my commitment to fully implement those orders and to make sure that the funding is there that's appropriate.
You mentioned the ruling, and this meeting's falling on the anniversary of that ruling, and yet we've seen the federal government fail to comply there and fight this in the courts. Is something going to change there?
Well, I don't think we're fighting anything. I think we're working with partners, and in fact, I'm working very actively with the partners who are parties to the tribunal, the First Nations Caring Society, as well as the Assembly of First Nations and the other parties, and working quite directly with all of the leaders of those organizations. I've made it very clear to them that we want to achieve full compliance. We're literally going through order by order to make sure that we get the work done, including the funding that's there. It's all about collaboration. It's about focusing on the children, changing the system, investing in prevention, and we have a full commitment of our government to achieve compliance.
For some time now, we've been hearing about Indigenous women and recently again having their children having birth in secret. What does that tell you about this system?
You know what, it breaks my heart when I hear those kinds of stories, because it just speaks to the policies clearly not being correct when a woman has to hide away to give birth for fear that her child will be taken from her. It speaks to a system that doesn't acknowledge the necessity and importance of families being kept together, of recognizing the role of culture, the role of family, and needing to find ways that those family connections will be prioritized, and that in fact if there are challenges or reasons why a child might be apprehended, then let's address those causes. Let's address the poverty or the housing issue or the health issue that the parents might be facing, and find a way that we can support those families and support those parents so that they can keep their children with them.
Minister, we've been hearing in Yellowknife this week where the National Inquiry is some testimony there from family members who are talking about the impact of the child welfare system. Do you see a link between those two?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. The data that we do have suggests that if you look at missing persons in this country, that children who grew up in foster care are heavily overrepresented amongst missing persons. Certainly that's the data that we've seen from Manitoba, for example. And there is a distinct link between those, and so that certainly emphasizes again the importance of really overhauling the approach and making sure that we get kids back with their families and hopefully avoid these very high apprehension rates that currently exist.
Well, Minister, we look forward to seeing what comes out of the meetings this week, and we thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Melanie Omeno of the Women of the Métis Nation had high hopes for the meetings tomorrow and Jane Philpott's response to the situation. Here's what she had to say on In Focus earlier following the interview with the minister.
We see that she's actually come out of the gate running to try to deal with the Indigenous services, and I'm hopeful that with the new change in the ministry to have 2 ministries and to try to deal with the fact that we need Indigenous services all across the spectrum that understand and identify issues specific to each of the Indigenous groups of people in a distinction-based process. We're very hopeful that that's what she sees and that's what she's doing. So she's demonstrated that in many of the issues that she's bringing forward, and when she speaks about the issues, she does seem to be informed and has been apprised of what's going on. So we are hopeful that it's going to go forward in a good way.
Time for a quick break, and then we'll have the latest from the hearings in Yellowknife for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, where commissioners heard about a lack of resources for domestic abuse survivors. Here's a look at Thursday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. -9 in Halifax, sunny and -11 in Fredericton, snowy and -5 in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, a chilly -22 in La Grande, sunny skies in parts of Quebec, -10 in Montreal, -12 in Val-d'Or, -2 in Toronto and London, -5 in Sault Ste. Marie, cloudy and -4 in Wawa, -14 in Big Trout Lake. Headed to northern Manitoba, sunny and -20 in Churchill, -12 in Island Lake, snowing and -7 in Barons River, -3 in Winnipeg and Brandon. Over to Saskatchewan, +4 in Swift Current, -2 in Saskatoon, cloudy in parts of northern Saskatchewan, -9 in Meadow Lake, -17 in Stony Rapids. Welcome back. It's day 2 for Yellowknife hearings in the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Commissioners have heard from families that there is a lack of support for women in abusive relationships. Our reporter, Charlotte Mork-Jacobs, is at the inquiry.
It was taken away from her son, her baby, who was only 2.
It's been 15 years since the brutal murder of Joni Andre, and 15 years for Jada Andre to finally break the silence and open up on what happened to her older sister.
Good morning, Jada. Do you promise to tell your truth to the commissioners in a good way today? Great, thank you.
Jada is testifying at the MMIWG hearings in Yellowknife today. She is sharing good memories.
Oh, she's beautiful. She's the most outgoing, lively girl
and painful truths.
I forgot to see her take her last breath. I never got to tell her how much I loved her.
Joni Andre was beaten, stabbed, and left for dead by her husband in the small NWT community of Fort McPherson. Phone service was down at the time, and Joni was alone for an hour before anyone came. Jada told commissioners how her murderer was in and out of courts and had a violent past.
I remember someone called and said that she was really beaten up, and
I do not think
inquiry staff read out the sentence to a full room of supporters.
He asks the now convicted offender to stand and says, in my view, in all the circumstances of this case and having given the matter much anxious consideration, the appropriate sentence for what you have done is 8 years in jail. After crediting the remand time of 3 years, I sentence you today to serve 5 years in jail.
Like other families have told the inquiry, Jada says many people are related, making for a conflict of interest with counselors in the community.
yeah, you know, like, there's nothing that could be done now, and it's been 15 years since it happened, but for me, I feel like the justice system failed, and yes, like somebody who has such a big criminal record, like a past, that, you know, could get away with something so easily. It's like I think he served 3 years in jail before court, and then it was 5 years after, so.
For Jada, she says the court system has failed Indigenous people. She lost her brother after he was struck by a vehicle and died from injuries.
Maybe things would have been different, like maybe we all could have got help sooner. But do you think with trauma that bad, it should be there right from the beginning?
So far, there are 21 people that have shared their truths in Yellowknife in public hearings, private hearings, and with statement gatherers. Jada's voice is one of them.
Well, you know, now that it's over, I feel like I should have said more because stuff is coming back to me now, but I feel so much like lighter. Like, you know, a lot of stuff opened up and a lot of good memories came back in.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Commissioners also heard from survivor and women's advocate Geraldine Sharp. She spoke about the abuse suffered at the hands of her father and the lack of resources for survivors of a domestic abuse.
My devil was dead, and I was happy. I was heartbroken that I would no longer have a father, but I was happy that I would not have to worry about being hit anymore, that I would not be yelled at anymore, that I would not be belittled anymore. I was happy. And I promised myself that day that I would not let any man do that to me or my children. In the Northwest Territories, there are 5 transition houses. 5 out of our 33 communities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Inuit Transition House at the time was the only one that owned its house. The stories about not wanting to speak to counsellors because of family members and conflict, yes, that is alive and well in every community. If my sister is the nurse in charge in a community, I'm not going to want to be treated by my sister. If my brother was the RCMP officer, am I going to go and report a crime to him if I don't want him to know about it? This is the reality. And if I have to call someplace else, a 1-800 number, then I'm told, we'll get back to you. These struggles are real.
We welcome your comments on this or any of our stories. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter at APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. The Quebec inquiry into relations between Indigenous peoples and certain public services continues in Val-d'Or this week. Cree School Board President Kathleen Wooten testified about some challenges they're facing. She believes housing and health have a direct impact on the school board's mission. She said it's challenging to improve low retention and graduation rates when students live in overcrowded homes. But there has been some progress since the Cree School Board took control 40 years ago.
I think for the Cree especially, I think we've progressed quite a bit because of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, because we've been able to take back control for governance, for education, for health.
A Métis doctor from Manitoba and a First Nations leader in Newfoundland are the latest to receive the Order of Canada. We have more on that after the break. Here's the rest of Thursday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, -10 in Grande Prairie and Fort McMurray, -11 in Peace River, a snowy -6 in Edmonton, +2 in Lethbridge, heading to the west coast, +5 in Kamloops and Port Hardy, +3 in Bella Coola, cloudy and -4 in Prince George, a cool -18 in Fort Nelson, in Yukon -18 in Watson Lake, -22 in Rock River and Old Crow, over to NWT, -20 in Trout Lake, -24 in Yellowknife, -24 in Colville Lake, sunny and -25 in Sax Harbor. In Nunavut, -22 in Whale Cove, -27 in Baker Lake, sunny and -25 in Cape Dorset, sunny and -28 in Resolute. Two more Indigenous people were made members of the Order of Canada today. Dr. Judith Bartlett is one of the first Indigenous people to graduate from the University of Manitoba's medical program. She's worked on improving health care in Manitoba First Nations and was instrumental in establishing Winnipeg's Aboriginal Health and Wellness Centre. Misil Joe is a longtime leader of the Maui-Pukek First Nation in Newfoundland. He's had a long-term goal of repatriating the skulls of two Beothuk, the extinct people of Newfoundland, from a museum in Scotland. A well-respected leader from Carcross, Yukon, has passed away today. Doris McLean, whose traditional name was Guna, served as chief of the Carcross Tagish First Nation from 1988 to 1992. She was also the first Aboriginal woman to serve as Sergeant at Arms for the Yukon Legislative Assembly. McLean, who is known as a prolific storyteller, will be remembered for her tireless efforts to preserve language and culture. She died at the age of 77 after a long battle with cancer. Doris was the mother of our colleague, APTN National News reporter Shirley McLean. We want to send our sincere condolences in her passing. That's your APTN National News for Wednesday. Join us tomorrow, where we'll be bringing you the latest on the emergency child welfare meetings in Ottawa. And for news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night.